We have the ingredient to grow. Sabah is just like diamond in the rough. We have to polish it to grow, to dazzle.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Sabah Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Adi Putera, where we dive into the nitty-gritty on why Sabah truly matters in Malaysia, where we bring experts, thinkers, personalities to give us their opinions on why exactly Sabah matters. So Sabah stands at an interesting crossroads. On one hand, the state remains one of Malaysia's richest in natural resources, but on the other hand, questions surrounding fiscal capacity, subsidy reform, investment and long-term development continue to shape public debate. Increasingly, attention has shifted from simply asking how much revenue Sabah should receive to a deeper question: how should Sabah manage its wealth? The discussion has brought renewed interest in ideas such as the Sabah Sovereign Wealth Fund, not simply as a financial institution, but as part of a broader conversation about fiscal responsibility, sustainability, and governance alongside the state's economic aspirations. Today we have Associate Professor Dr. Firdausi Sufyan, political economist and former CEO of Invest Sabah Sendirian Berhad. Doctor, thank you for coming on today. So I want to ask you, you have been in academia and you have been in corporate. How would you find blending these two experiences contribute to what you would say Sabah's development?
First of all, I think when I have this two-world experience, that really give me the advantage of having the theory and also bringing into practice, right? Because I think both are not mutually exclusive, both are very important. But of course, in the end of the day, it's important when you in corporate, you have to materialize things. On the other hand, in academia, it's not just the theory, but also the empirical side of it, where the experience then in corporate that give me the edge to see things and broaden my perspective as a whole when we look at the political economy of Sabah, Malaysia, or Southeast Asia in general, or even the global. Yeah. So when we look at development right now, when we talk about, because if you look at post-COVID-19, I think there's so many things happen, so many unbecoming events, should I say, that had happened. First of all, we have that COVID-19. Then after that, we have Ukraine war. And then we have geopolitical rupture and geo-economic tension. And then we have Trump tariff, give the world a shock. And then after that, of course, the Strait of Hormuz, which actually give a lot of impact to the world. So if you look at it, it is a polycrisis ever since pre-COVID-19. So some country recover, some country recover and then bounce. Some country have suffer economic decline. Some continue to be resilient in a way. So if you look at Malaysia, you are right, because we are at the crossroad. We managed to recover from the COVID-19. If you look at the GDP in Malaysia, it is a V-shaped curve. Malaysia has recorded a V-shaped curve every crisis, 5 crises that we went through. So it tells you a good story when you have a V-shaped curve. Yeah. So we had a V-shaped curve, so meaning to say we bounce and then we recover. While in the progress and the process of recovering, so many things happen along the way, right? We have food inflation, if you still remember, 3-4 years ago. And then after that, now we have the energy crisis. And if you look at all this, to be honest, yes, a lot of people feel the pinch. You and I feel the pinch. You and I feel the cost of goods have increased over the years. Inflation is real, all right? And then people do see the problem, do feel food prices increases, even as we speak right now. If you look at the data from Dosem, nasi campur, kopi, chapati, roti canai, all has increased, right? So so if you look at all this, Malaysia's, if you look at the entire process, developing, despite all this event, well, of course, Malaysia continue to record a positive growth, right? The trajectory is quite positive. We managed to reduce trade deficit. all right? And then we managed to rationalize subsidies. And then we reduce our unemployment, reduce poverty rate somehow, right? So on national level, if you look at it, there's a lot of bouquet, right? This is very good when it comes to trade, and also export. Yeah. So last year, it was recorded 400 over billion, the highest ever recorded. All right, in Malaysia, for the past 5 years, if you look at investment, it increased 15%, and which is good, right? Despite all those crises that we went through, we continue to maintain a resilient growth, right? And then we also look at how growth, productivity, right? So we continue to see and record a positive growth rate, right? Wages and also income household increase as well, but we can go back into that later to discuss more. Yeah, and then if you look at in terms of world competitiveness, for the past 3 years, Malaysia jumped 19th step to one of the most competitive in Southeast Asia, second after Singapore, and then now is ranked 13. So if you look at the entire progress, it looks amazing on the macro level, right? But of course, the question is, with all this macro indicator, I think a lot of people on real economic reality, right, is that so what? That's always the question, right? The question, so what with all these numbers, right? Well, it matters though. These numbers matters for a country to grow, because we do have an end game. We have an end game what we want to achieve under the Madani framework, under RMK 13, and of course under NETAR, and then now we have that NSS, the National Semiconductor Strategies, and other grand policy. Now, if you look at all these policies, it gives a tone. It set a tone where we want to go in end game. That's very important, because in any economic development, you must have a clear vision. The end game must be very clear. But this end game, this vision that you want to achieve, always boil down to the mission, which is how you want to do it. All right. So growth is important, but what is growing? That's very important. Who will benefit this? All right, and then does it have a spillover? Right, this is very important. When we look at Malaysia, it's okay, it's fine. Now, if you look at Sabah, on the other hand, all right, it recorded a positive growth rate as well. I think I really have to put this very clear. Sabah, I have observed Sabah political economy and economic development for the past few years, we went through 5 crises. All the crises, to be honest, Sabah never recorded negative growth rate except for COVID-19. No one can escape from that, So, but again, we bounce back. But of course, how we bounce back, I got to be honest, because it's a bit slow. Even at national level, in terms of growth rate, is slow as well. So right now, when you look at the trajectory, it is moving towards a positive one. Last year, we recorded 5.1%, another 0.1% equal to national growth rate. And then, of course, if you look at a lot of those sectors, recorded positive growth rate as well. Like, for instance, like manufacturing, we gross 5.5% higher than the national one, which is 4.5%, right? And then all these are good things that we want to hear. Now, of course, when we talk about all this growth, all right, it will go back to the question again, right? So how do people feel, right? Salary increase, productivity increase, but why my income is not enough, all right? Why I still don't feel enough, right? So these are the things that we have to unpack, right? Because if you look at inflation, this is the most critical part, because in any crisis, it will cause inflation, especially when you have energy crisis, right? It has been recorded ever since 1970s, and then you had the commodity crisis, and then the series of energy crisis. It will cause what they call cost push inflation. Now, 2019 until 2024, the average growth rate, rate for inflation is 9.5%. For salary, wages is 7.5%. To make it very simple, all right, if you look at Malaysia as a whole, our inflation, if you have 100 ringgit, 25% you have to give to inflation. You have 75 ringgit. What can you buy with 75 ringgit, right? So these are the things that a lot of Malaysians actually are very concerned. However, despite all these brickbats, but we do have a bouquet where we have the subsidies. Well, the subsidies actually really help, right? Subsidy, if you look at it, it reduces your burden, right? Government spend a lot. The highest was back in 2022, around 77.6 billion, 80 billion. That is the highest ever recorded in the history of Malaysia, right? So that is like 10 times more that we spend on development for Sabah, right? So that's a lot of money. So, but the government have to rationalize it, because subsidy in the end of the day, as much as the government wanted to help the people, all right, subsidy can have backlash to our fiscal policy and also capacity as well. Right? A lot of country rationalize subsidies. Right?
I mean, an argument to be made about subsidies is that when you spend so much on subsidies, there's an opportunity cost for long-term development, right?
Yeah.
So what can you say about the ratio of subsidy to that opportunity cost? Could that subsidy be rationalized further to probably put it into more fundamental development priorities? For example, Sabah it can be put more into strengthening the foundations rather than subsidies being used to alleviate short-term concerns.
Yeah. Well, if I can put it like this, because subsidy can be, it's like temporary diagnosis for the economy, all right? If you have headache, migraine, for instance, because you're stressed, you take Panadol and give you temporary relief, but the stress is still there, right? So you cannot keep on popping Panadol for the past, a week or a month, all right? So you have to de-stress yourself. So yes, subsidy do have trade-off, right? So on one hand, if you want to subsidy right now, we spend around 50 plus billion, all right? On the other hand, we want to spend on development as well, right? But development, we have to be very clear now, because under the Fiscal Responsibility Act, they put a lot of cap, including development funding too, which is 3% to the GDP. So right now, Sabah receive around 6.9 billion. We spend subsidy this year, couple of months ago, like April and May, we spent more than 10 billion both months, where when energy prices really spike. So now where we want to strike the balance, right? Is either we want development, we rationalize subsidy, and then we give the money for development, or we want to give subsidy to people, right, to reduce their cost of burden. Now, both are important, right? This is why it's so difficult when if you are government, you have to think of both, right? Now, we cannot do away with subsidy. That has been a policy legacy. It is a wicked problem, all right? But you have to strike a balance on that. So that's why it's important that the government took, I think, a very bold move. It's not popular when they rationalize subsidy. Right now, when they rationalize subsidy, including diesel, where you need IC, all right, to get the subsidy. Now, that is a good approach, right? So with that extra money, now you have to think of the rakyat as a whole, right? Now you have to give money, direct fiscal injection to the poor people. So subsidy have to be targeted, whether you like it or not. Because if it's not targeted, it will be a waste. That's for sure. It will be a backlash. And on the other hand, we also have to think of development too. Now, development is very important, especially for Sabah, right? One of the main contributor to the countries, ranks 7 in terms of share GDP right now. Usually top 5. It will be top 5, top 10 usually, and then of course they will say that, look, you take. We have this sentiment that you took a lot of resources from us right now, okay, and then we need more development fund, right? Okay, we give you 6.6 plus billion. Is the highest in the country, all right? But I think it's not enough. Such a big state, all right? This is not. I'm not to mention Sarawak. It's even bigger, all right? So you need more money for this both state, because both are powerhouse for commodity to the country, right? So we cannot be spending too much on unproductive. I mean, most economists would say subsidy is unproductive at all, because when you give subsidy, what are the productive things that you do? What is the outcome? You reduce burden, which is good, which is very important. But if it's blanket, all right, and that will be unproductive. That's why it have to be targeted, because people need to feel it, especially the B40. I mean, not just B40, M40, the one that affected need to feel that the government helped to cushion the impact. So that's why targeted subsidy is crucial. It has been it is a pertinent issue, right? Because sometimes when you do blanket subsidy, what they call is good politics, bad economics. It's good politics. You say, I'm helping you. I'm helping the people. Not everyone I'm helping. Not like Sarah, that 100 ringgit, everybody got it, right? Including a T10, T1 got it as well, right? I think that we should think of something about it, right?
Because these things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, right? Because when you talk about subsidies, doesn't necessarily stimulate the market, right? And Malaysia's economy does derive a lot from domestic consumption. So when we talk about fiscal spending, fiscal responsibility, and fiscal sustainability, which has been a topic of conversation for Sabah for quite some time, you brought up the Sovereign Wealth Fund. And this was part of the GRS manifesto during the last election campaign season, that they said that should they get into power, they will push forward for the Sovereign Wealth Fund. And I think that Amizan Ali said that this will be able to generate 10 billion ringgit. Now, this is a very sophisticated financial instrument, right? And usually countries like Norway, Kuwait, they developed this because they had a surplus of natural resources, an abundance of natural resources. But when it comes to the expertise behind it, like I said, this is a very sophisticated instrument, requiring a lot of expertise, a lot of delicate governance models, right? How would you see Sabah adopting such a endeavor?
That's a good question, because Sovereign Wealth Fund, I guess, is a forward thinking. I think when Dr. Armizan was talking about Sovereign Wealth Fund, because there's a reason why Sovereign Wealth Fund is important, right? So Malaysia have Khazanah Nasional Berhad, was set up in 90s, right? You mentioned about Qatar. Most of the Emiratis country, they do have Sovereign Wealth Fund. Their fund is different, it's big. Right? China have Sovereign Wealth Fund. Vietnam recently have Sovereign Wealth Fund.
I think Trump also announced his own Sovereign Wealth Fund for America. Everyone's getting in on it, apparently.
Exactly. Philippines have Sovereign Wealth Fund called Mahalikar. All right. There's a lot of Sovereign Wealth Fund. Now, the interesting part is that most of this Sovereign Wealth Fund is national level. All right, they have different mandate. The objective is very different. Yes, you are right. It is a sophisticated fiscal instrument that you have to, devise, because you need to look at the investment portfolio that you have to investing in. Now, so you are right. It is not easy, but it is important. If you look at most of these countries that they have sovereign wealth fund, most of them are resource-rich economies. Yeah. Because they have surplus, so that's why they use the surplus to finance for investment. All right, instead of getting money, from your resources and then put it in your consolidated fund or your state coffer, then after that spend for public purposes. So might as well we take some portion of it and then we invest on maybe real estate, bond, tax, shares, all right? So then you will get return from this share. So the entire purpose of having sovereign wealth fund, among others, is to move away from resource curse. That's number one. All right, because resource curse is when you have a lot of resources, but you're unable to convert your resources to a sustained economic growth and development because you don't have a lot of financial assets because you spend everything already, right? So that's why they try to use those resources, the income from the resource like mineral or oil, and then they put in sovereign wealth fund. Now, so this gives an opportunity for the state to invest in elsewhere, right? So that they can have extra income for development, basically empowering their fiscal capacity. Now, most of the sovereign wealth fund on national level, they are looking abroad and then help nationally. Now, but nobody actually look at the sub-national level, all right? So the idea to have a sovereign wealth fund at sub-national level have a different objective and mandate. Sarawak, all right, they set up their sovereign wealth fund, I think it was last year, all right? That's a good move because they have extra, they have surplus of 30 billion, and then of course their GDP is 158 billion, and then of course with gas, there's a lot of gas in Sarawak. So with that surpluses, that's why they set up Sarawak Sovereign Wealth Fund. Now, it's important that for the past decades, Sabahan has been wanting and expecting a lot rigorous development, all right? So of course, we have to admit that sometimes the fiscal centralization and the fiscal federalism somehow may hinder fiscal transfer, all right? Now, to have our sovereign wealth fund, meaning to say we are empowering our fiscal capacity. We become less dependent with federal. We can chart our own economic direction. I think that should be a very clear mandate when we want to set a sovereign wealth fund, because we do have extra, all right? Maybe we're not extra. We can proportionate our money, say from the oil royalty and from the 5% that the SST from petroleum, and of course the upcoming 40%, all right? Hopefully we're going to get it soon, all right? So all these are extra money that, yes, you have to give to the people, but at the same time, you should set aside some portion of it for investment. And this investment, we have to make it very clear. It is a bit different, right? Because we, not like Hazana, because they are looking at, where they do have social responsibility, but to generate, to give what they call, to give a big push for the economy. We can have that as well. But more importantly, what we want is fiscal capacity, empowering ourselves, become less dependent. And we can, every rakyat, Sabahan, have to feel the wealth in their hand and also in their pocket.
Yeah, when it comes to the idea of fiscal federalism, it allows us more latitude in how we decide how our finances are used, invested, so on and so forth. But at the same time, oftentimes sovereign wealth funds, the establishment of which also signals competition in markets, right? So perhaps Sabah's indication of a sovereign wealth fund could also challenge the markets in Malaya, in West Malaysia, Sarawak, and so on and so forth. How would the reception be at the federal level? Because they have Khazanah set up way longer than before, quite sophisticated fiscal planning and all that. How would that pan out in the execution phase? Do we need to go to the federal level and say, we're going to set up our own sovereign wealth fund, please do not interfere, please do not compete against us too much, or don't set up oligarchs to hedge us into the smaller market, right? Yeah. How would that play out when it comes to, because in the global market, it is a free market. It is more freer than national market. How would that play out in terms of execution and how we want to diversify our financial portfolio?
I think with the slow progress of, especially on industrial development and other development that we want, right? I think, yes, number one, it will be very competitive. But so what? It is the nature of any capitalist economies. We are part of capitalist economy. I think for the federal government, I think it's not a problem for them, because that would be empowering the state. I think they wouldn't say no to Sovereign Wealth Fund, because somehow it's good for them as well, because they know that you are generating income. Perhaps they should be partner with us, because if we talk about Hazana, then the question is how much investment they actually put in for Sabah to grow. How much industrial park that most of those Sovereign Wealth Fund or PNB or any GLIC in Peninsula actually invested in Sabah or Sarawak, right? And I cannot see much, right? So might as well we have our own Sovereign Wealth Fund, and then we must be very clear with our mandate, right? Because Sovereign Wealth Fund sometimes it can be very confusing. Right, because there's so many levels to Sovereign Wealth Fund. Sovereign Wealth Fund, like Alberta in Canada, Alaska, they have a very clear mandate for the state level. It's a very good example. Canada is a big country, but the state is quite autonomous in a way. They set their own Sovereign Wealth Fund, and then of course Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund is a good example as well. But it's a different setup. You cannot just take, Norwegian is one of the best performing, we're going to adopt it. No. There's always a context to it, right? So that's why I think here for Sabah, it's very important for us to have our own economic model. And one of those, because given our resources that we have to convert that resource asset into financial asset. I think that has been the key problem for us, all right? Even though for the past few years, we recorded surplus for our state finance performance, but so with that surplus, so what you want to do about it? So you should go and invest, isn't it? So we, because Sabah recorded AAA, rating, so meaning to say we are quite good in managing our finances. So now with that record and also those money that we have, we should put that into Sovereign Wealth Fund, and then we can invest in industrial development. I think that is the key, right? Because in any economic development, including Malaysia for that matter, we depend on downstream industry. The downstream industry is the key. But downstream industry in Sabah still remain small, all right? And there's a lot of uneven success as well in terms of growing it. But because we need money for that, okay? And it's not easy to bid money at federal level to set industrial park because they are bigger need. We have 14 states. Penang being the 6th largest, semiconductor E&E producer in the world, right? So there's a different need and also comparative advantage. All right, it's okay. Federal, fine. They can have their own set of model, but Sabah should have their own model. And I think this is very important too. I think for Sabah, I think they really have to come up with, Sabah should come up with their own set of economic model. They don't have to emulate other states, all right, because we have different contexts. Context matters. Our comparative advantage, only Sabahan knows how and what we are good at and how to get things done is their own people, right? So that's why having that Sovereign Wealth Fund can be an outlet for us to grow what is best for us, right? Albeit industrial development, right? Tourism, infrastructure. But having said this, does not mean that we are less dependent with federal.
Yeah.
Right? There are things that the federal have to still honor under that federal list. They still have to. Under the Constitution, they are obliged to do it. Right? But there are things that we can chart our own path that we don't have to wait. Right? We, with that Sovereign Wealth Fund, then we can start to give that big push, because the idea for growth, especially on industrial development, all right, especially on industry, right? you cannot just call, okay, now private sector, please come in, and then we have land, this is what we do, right? We must crowd them in, right? The state must give some sort of a signal, because in economic growth, it's important that the state give a signal. They are the one that shape the market, right? Private sector wouldn't just come in, all right, look, okay, I'm going to invest this. I believe it. The private sector will look at what is the state trajectory, what is the profile of the economy, what is the policy, what are the incentives, what are the things that you offer. So this is what we call shaping the market, right? So when we shape the market, so that's why the Sovereign Wealth Fund can have certain stake on that to give a big push, because sometimes private sector wouldn't want to take much risk. So that's why private sector, along with the local GLC that we have here, to give that big push. Sometimes private sector don't want to go in because they look at their balance sheet. Right? They look at their bottom line. If I don't make money, why should I go in? But if you have state having that stake in, right, that would give a different profile to that growth, especially on industrial development.
Walk through me the architecture of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, because you hinted it through industrial development, right? Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund, the CEO Nikolai Tengen, he talked about how his priorities for Norway isn't necessarily to generate profit anymore, but to also invest in bankable solutions to climate change. So they're already looking at it from a green perspective. And just the other day, YB Menteri Atta Kurup, Minister of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability, he was talking about the climate change bill, not just as a way to preserve the environment, but as a way to turn it into a monetizable and bankable asset, right? So oftentimes, sovereign wealth funds can be indicators of a state's trajectory or priority in development. The GRS government is still figuring out how they want to set up the sovereign wealth fund. But for you, the architecture, mandate, code of ethics for the sovereign wealth fund, where do you think they should be leaning towards in terms of investment portfolios? You said real estate and all that, but it shows that we can invest in a variety of other development solutions and then put it back into Sabah. What would be your, if you had a say in how it was set up, what kind of focus it would be? What would you say it would be, Doc?
All right. There are many levels of sovereign wealth fund in the world. Even in the economic literature, they will give you 10 types of sovereign wealth fund. All right. Usually, sovereign wealth fund invests in very stable and very clear and very strict mandate. You cannot simply just take the money because you're talking about, because it's sovereign wealth fund. All right. But there are certain category of sovereign wealth fund, and other country practices as well. Even China practice that. Even Alberta, Canada, Norway, all right. So I would label that as a development and strategic sovereign wealth fund. What does it mean? Meaning to say our mandate is very strategic what we want to achieve. All right. I think I want to draw some of the recent book by Mariana Mazzucato, a very famous economist, right, talking about common good of economy. Right. So when you want to grow something, you have to ask yourself, policymaker, when you want to grow something, it has to be based on your context specific. It has to be on your comparative advantage. It has to be grow together with who, you have to ask that. And the spillover must be there for the people. Right? So I think in Sabah, it's very important that we grow because we have, you say it just now, we have when it comes to climate, we are carbon sink, we help absorb most of the carbon, right? Mm-hmm. And then we have a lot of resources, mining, and then we have oil, of course, all right? So with this money, I think we have to be strategic with what we want. That is industrial, looking at downstream industry. I think among other things that we should do is to have a downstream industry for our oil and gas in that. So we make it very clear, this is what we want. And then second, what do we want? So for instance, like food industries, you can never go wrong with food because everybody want to eat. All right, okay. And then of course, if you want now, people because talk about E&E, all right, but E&E is not something straightforward that we look at. We can just bring in those company in. You must set an ecosystem for that because it's like a spaghetti ball, right? There's so many company are interrelated together, but we can focus on a certain part of the sector. We can bring in here, all right? I think KKIP is doing that, right? So we have to focus on our industrial development. I think that would be our key. And then, of course, with all this, if you start to focus on industrial development, downstream industries, because the key is to provide job. Well, unemployment, I think I don't have to say much. That is really a problem. That will create job for the younger generation, for the younger people, right? And perhaps we can also set with all this sovereign wealth fund, maybe we can have a fund that for education. TVET for that matter. We talk about vocational, right? The government spends 7 billion for vocational, higher than Sabah Development Fund, right? But so we can tap into that as well. Industrial development is key, and of course tourism as well. Tourism matters, right? So, but tourism can go so much, because once COVID, everything locked down, no more. There's no business. But industry, we can, right? Now, one important example, back in Caribbean, there's sovereign wealth fund in Caribbean as well. So they finance blue economy. Now we talk about blue economy, so that will be part of it as well. So because that is a new agenda for the country, for the state as well, and to be on. I mean, this is something to be proud of because we spearheaded the blue economy and now become important pillar in RMK 13. Now, that is among other things that we can focus on. So we got to be very clear. We have to write it down, make it clear what we want. It cannot just be, all right, an industry, but what industry we have to look at. Okay, if it's blue economy, what blue economy? I think blue economy is very clear, right? On fisheries, on transport, maritime activities, that's very clear. And then, so industry, we are very clear as well what we want based on our competitive advantage.
When the SMJ 2.0 was launched, there was an emphasis on administrative sophistication and empowering administrators to carry out the SMJ 2.0 vision alongside the RMK 13. So when we talk about the Sovereign Wealth Fund, it's also an additional layer through fiscal sophistication. So on that note, how are we to inject further development in terms of not the tangible ones, but governance models-wise, like the governance architecture itself, right? Because nowadays, we cannot go through the same old way of development, the conventional mode of development, which is you develop infrastructure, tangible infrastructure. It does not always necessarily translate to added value. Like you said, the Sovereign Wealth Fund is to help catalyze economic growth. So how can we talk about moving that fund, like the Sovereign Wealth Fund, what was created, what's invested, the returns and dividends, to ensure that there's a frictionless pathway to probably the SMEs, the small business owners, right? Because at the end of the day, is that this wealth fund is not just for development, but it's also to probably assist industries, like you said, industrial development, through all these SMEs. Sabah is becoming a hub for emerging social enterprises, SMEs, micro businesses, so on and so forth, right? How can we ensure that we have a proper pipeline of investment to market?
Right. I think there are a couple of key questions there when you look at it. Yes, you are right. In the recent SMJ, when they launched 2.0 under the Sangkalpa 2030, it's good that we have a vision right now. We have to achieve 100 billion GDP. So our GDP growth rate is 5.1%, increase from 84 to 88 billion. So 2030, so we have another 4 more years to go. Perhaps every year 3 billion. Yes, we can achieve that perhaps. Yeah. So, but to achieve this, it cannot be the same old approach or same old business model. So it got to be a bit unusual, right? So you're gonna go beyond what we do right now. The economic pie have to grow, right? So you are right. Governance matters. So I think the recent one, what they call RK Reformasi Karena Birokrasi, RKB, Sabah is also part of it, which is very good. All right, so that autonomy actually is key, because in any economic development, autonomy is one of the key conditions for a state to grow. All right, that's clear. Right, so that's very good. So sovereign wealth fund, of course, you need a proper governance. I think the governance is very clear. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, because it's very clear. We have sovereign wealth fund. Hazana is a very good example when it comes to the governance, right? But perhaps the mandate is very important, right? And of course, the people that you put in, right, is very important as well. All right, a very credible fund manager, perhaps, that you have to think of. But as you can see right now, Adi, we have a lot of brilliant Sabahan. To be honest, we just have to look for them, lure them back, then to contribute back to the state. But they want to see what's new, right? So perhaps with the sovereign wealth fund, right, by converting whatever resources, the resources that we have into financial asset, that's very important. And to know where we want to go, what is our end game, we have to be very clear as well. SMJ is there. We have blue economy, and there are a few things that also OTAC, Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion, right? So we are Sabah has a lot of interesting things happen. That we got to be very clear again, right? From this growth, that 100 billion, who will benefit? Right? Which sector that we want to grow? Right? It cannot be just the same old one. If it's just palm oil, petroleum, mining, and quarry, 22% of the... nobody can beat us that in the country, We contribute so much, right? Even Sarawak is 20% of the GDP, we 22%, So we cannot be the same old one, but it can be as a platform, as a foundation. But that foundation needs to grow. It's a soil, a fertile soil for us. But we need new sun for other plant to grow, right? So that's why we need this. So sovereign wealth fund can be an answer to it, right? As a lot of economists nowadays talk about national wealth fund, which is similar to sovereign wealth fund, to give that, like you said, catalytic role, the big push, what they call crowding in. We need that because what is going on right now in the world, a lot of people have this very wait and see sentiment. So because of private sector have that wait and see sentiment, so who wants to start? It's the government. So the government need to be very clear with what they want. When they start something, they cannot just say, okay, let's start this plan A. Okay, everybody go in. Let me see who will win. No, you got to take part of it. You got to shape that market, right? You're not just correcting failure, but you are shaping the market where you want to go. It's not just fixing, it's taking risks together, all right? Because private sector won't simply just take risks, because once they have bank to answerable too, So you have to take risks together. So it's like co-creation. All right, this is something that we have to look at. We work together. So the public-private sector initiative is very important, especially against the backdrop of what is going on right now, because it's so uncertain. We just signed an Iran deal and then peace deal, then suddenly, not even 5 days, there's another strike. So it's so uncertain. The geopolitical rapture give a lot of private sector uncertainty. So that's why the state have to be certain where they go.
This is a very interesting conversation to be had on risk sharing and risk management between public and private, because Sabah for the longest time has been state-led. A lot of enterprises has been GLC, state-led enterprises and endeavors. But we can see that, like we said, the conventional method is that the state provides the funds, the grants, and the transfers over to industries, right? But it's like you said, that model may not be the best for added value. GLCs probably might have to go to raise sukuk or find sukuk or Islamic financing and other alternative financing models, right? And that comes with a lot of degree of trust from the government, isn't it? Like the government has to trust the GLCs and enterprises to find their own finances, and that comes with autonomy, right? And I like how when you mentioned the government shapes the environment, but the government does not actively participate in that environment by dictating what the environment should be or what players should be in there, right? So how else can we cultivate more of this public-private environment of risk sharing, that the private, whatever happens to the private sectors, the government also is equally responsible, and vice versa? How do we how do we reinforce this mutual relationship between the two?
Yeah, if you look at American history, when they started Google Map, when they started, all these EV, this is not something 5 years ago. It was decades ago. It was started by DARPA, the defense research agency, together with the private sector. There's so much failure there, so much failure in GPS back then. All right, now we have go so much advanced, right? So when trying things, when it comes to public and private, I think there are a few things that we have to be very clear. This relationship have to be bound with the three things, which is, first of all, investment, infusion, innovation. So the public-private sector must have this condition, because any growth, we have seen so much, government transfer money, company fail, blame them, or certain people at the government being blamed. No. This is not a blame game, right? When Samsung started, right, they didn't make profit for past 10 years. For 10 years, they don't make profit because of the innovation activities they're invested in, and then people don't have much allowance back then, Samsung started very, not in a good footing, but look at them right now. Of course, China, just look at the EV, BYD, CATL, where they start, how they start, right? It is government back, but they must have these three conditions. The investment is very clear. The investment is you and I, we invest. The condition is it has to be infusion. Infusion means, this is the problem. It's not just Sabah, but it's a national issue. In fact, it's a Southeast Asia issue. Right? Southeast Asia have this problem called middle income trap, because it boils down to low value added activities in the state, and that one, of course, related with the skill that we the investment that we are putting in the state, because most of those investments are not R&D related. Right? This same goes with China too. So back then, 20 years ago, they were the same as well. But so infusion here means whatever investment that you put in together, right, public and private sector. So the infusion is the knowledge transfer. It must happen. It should be the ultimate condition for that, because that is where you can move up the value chain. In NIMP, we have economic complexity as one of our mission. That mission cannot achieve in 2030 without this condition if you don't move up the value chain. So far, right now, if you look at the data right now, our economic complexity is no more than 20%. All right, there's not much of made in Malaysia. A lot of made by Malaysia. All right, you must be made in Malaysia. Now that infusion must happen, and this is where the infusion you can increase complexity and where you can increase salary indirectly. All right, because more skill related. From infusion, then that's where you start to get innovation, because now you are smarter, you learn already, you infuse with the knowledge, and now this is where the innovation gonna comes in. This is where you start to doing on your own with R&D, right, with more capital intensive activities. So these are the three things that we have to focus. Doesn't matter with the timeline. That progress is the journey, right? And the journey is the destination, because that's where we want to see that we are moving up the value chain. Otherwise, it will go back to the same template, same old approach. So three important things. So the government and the private sector must incorporate this in their collaboration and their institutional arrangement.
I guess that's the journey to how China got its own Shenzhen, Shanghai, Chongqing, and for US it's Silicon Valley, right? Probably you can say that's a very almost China enterprise at this point. But okay, this is all well and good. this is all about financial architecture, financial sustainability on the state's part. But we always have to go back to this underpinning principle, which is governance. You talked about getting the right people, getting the right hedge fund managers. How can we ensure that we inculcate and institutionalize good governance practices, accountability and transparency? Because at the end of the day, sovereign wealth funds is the taxpayers' money, and the taxpayer probably would like a say in how these funds are being managed, where it's going to. Probably they would like it to go to green financing, more sustainable solutions and investments. How can we ensure that principle of accountability is strengthened and institutionalized once we set up this sovereign wealth fund? Because we do not want another case like 1MDB, correct? We do not want a situation such as that. How do we become more like Norway in that regard of financial accountability, financial sustainability, and transparency?
Yeah, I mean, you are right. The key, of course, is governance. The rule of the game must be very clear, right? And then setting the rule of the game is clear as well. And then number two, of course, you need right people. I think there's so many professional Sabahan out there. I mean, not necessarily. I mean, if you really want Sabahan, there's a lot. You are right. We need right people to run that, because when it comes to sovereign wealth fund, the thinking and the risk-taking model and how they look at things have a different scheme. So that is very important. And of course, if you look at what sort of direction where you want to focus at, this is very important too, right? So these three things is very clear. I think governance, when it comes to governance, I think it goes without saying, the playbook is very clear, right? Governance, we know what are the conditions that we want, you have to incorporate in, right? The people, of course, is important, right? And of course, what sort of sector? That is very important for us as well. So these three things must come in, right? Like I said, with that, you must have the 3 I's: innovation, investment, infusion, and innovation. So these 3 things, and of course the 3 things that I mentioned just now, that one is ingredient for us to grow.
So it's about bringing back the talent that probably has left Sabah, attracting them. I mean, we have Tan Sri Andrew Sheng that came back to Sabah, now Special Advisor to the Chief Minister. And recently with the Asia Pacific Investment Summit, we had people like Dato' Omar Siddiq, who's HSBC Malaysia CEO, and he's a Sabahan, right? Born and bred Sabahan. So, I mean, it's undeniable. We have a great amount of talent in Sabah, just not in Sabah, it seems, right? So with the Sovereign Wealth Fund, how can we best attract that talent, the bankers, the accountants, the very high-level professionals, right? Because if you talk to a high-level professional Sabahan in, let's say, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, they would always come back to, there's no opportunity for me in Sabah. I probably don't feel appreciated in Sabah, or they don't get what I'm trying to say when it comes to these high-level ideas. I mean, Tan Sri Andrew, for his experience in World Bank and many worldwide experiences, often gets criticism from the average Sabahan saying that this is too high level. What's the point of bringing it in Sabah, right? How do we break down those barriers so that it's easier for professional high level Sabahans to come back and contribute?
Like I said, this is a good point. Yes, we have a lot of talented Sabahan out there, and so many things, so many pool of talent. Actually, not just in Sabah, they are elsewhere as well. It's not just bankers, fund managers, bureaucrats, officers, academicians as well. There's a lot of them too, right? So I think first, when you want to call them back, they want to see what is the end game, what's new. Yes, you're right. Opportunity matters to them. It's a rational choice, isn't it? They must see what is the new opportunity there. Is this opportunity backed up by the state, right? When I say back up, I think this is where the most important commodity that we need, which is trust, all right? I think the trust environment in sometimes, in the corporate world, in the civil servant, can be very categorical, right? Because sometimes you don't trust this, you don't trust that, become inefficient. When you don't have trust, you don't empower, right? So that's the problem, right? So now, to me, I think the trust environment is very important. So they want to see what's new, what things are being backed up by the state that really want to achieve, right? If they see this, obviously, they will want to come back, right? Yes, opportunity is limited, but that does not mean that it continue to be limited until now. So that's why we have all these, like you said just now, all these talented people like Tan Sri Sheng, now is back in Sabah, and then there's a lot of people who are in SME right now, who are used to work or have business in Singapore, in KL, they are back as well, right? So these people, actually, you have to show them an opportunity. I think Sabahan, I think they are sick and tired already when you tell them that, you are rich with resources, culture, oil and gas, palm oil, beautiful beaches, the best sunset in the world. Yes, we know that. The question is, with all these resources, the how part to transform matters. We know. You don't have to say it. Everybody knows. If you tell any Sabahan, they will know that, yes, I know a lot of, but what we are doing with this, right? So that's why the how part, right? Of course, Sovereign Wealth Fund is one of the one way, right, to start with. But how do we transform? That matters. But in the end of the day, any economic development, people matters, right? As much as the recent Nobel Prize winner talk about institution, as Moglu and James Robinson talk about institution, but that institution consists of people who work inside. People matters, and you got to trust these people. Right? I know sometimes it can be very difficult. It's easier said than done, but where we want to go matters. What we want to achieve matters. Our conviction to development important. And economic development without sophistication defeat the purpose of development. Because if you grow just one sector without having a spillover, it defeats the purpose of development.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's always going to be this tension between sophistication and simplicity, right? Sometimes the best way is to keep it simple. Or sometimes you need to be a bit more sophisticated, right? Especially when it comes to economic planning. I think Sabah has always leaned on to more of the simplistic side of things. Maybe because it's also colonial legacy, because the British set up the chartered company just to extract resources from Sabah. Now it's probably the same story. So resources are still being extracted from Sabah without value being retained. This is quite a paradigm shift to retain value in what we call the circular economy, grassroots economy. You can call it whatever you want, as long as value remains in Sabah. Of course, there's a sovereign wealth fund as an instrument, but that is still a tool being used by institutions, by leaders. How do we further inculcate this paradigm shift? Instead of extraction of resources without value coming back, how do we have equitable extraction with at the same time value being retained that is also sustainable? How do we make sure that if a tree is being cut down in the forest, that tree is ensured to help to provide for a family in Sabah, instead of the tree being exported for great add value to probably a wealthy mercantile elite in the West, right? How do we make sure that value is also retained here? Because this is a very huge, fundamental, almost existential crossroad for Sabah. How do we make that switch?
Yeah, you are right. I think among other things, which is when we discuss about development, is always that when we grow, most of those value and the money is not in Sabah, is elsewhere, right? So what if it's 5.1% growth rate, 88 billion worth of GDP, but the value is not here, money is not here. Sabahan don't feel that wealth in their hand, right? I think among other things, which is very important too, it's not just Sabah but Malaysia in general. We have this uneven income distribution and wealth distribution problem, right? Well, the rich is getting richer, and of course, the poor is getting poorer. Well, and that's where the subsidy comes in to help you, right? So, but it's very clear when we look at our wage to GDP, which is in Malaysia around 34%, Sabah is 14%, and then we want to see the value here. This is where very important that we have to focus on. Number one is our people. Number two is of course the infusion just now I mentioned. So the infusion is where the spill of the knowledge transfer. That's very important. Because if you want the value to stay here, the money to stay here, the people have to stay here, right? This is where I think when we talk about shaping the market together with the private sector, very important. Because infusion, innovation, work together. That's where the value you retain here. That's where your so-called your resources retain here. Of course, it goes without saying there are things we need to export, of course, right? But the key is the knowledge and the people and the resources, the money we're able to retain here. That's where I think the Sovereign Wealth Fund comes in. I think this is one among other things which is important too. I mean, thank you for mentioning that. We have to retain the value and also our resources here. So that Sovereign Wealth Fund gives that vehicle for us to retain some our resources and regenerate, so that when we regenerate the money, so it can help for intergenerational transfer, intergenerational investment for our rakyat in Sabah. So it's not easy, right? It's not easy, right? If you want to retain value, because things are so competitive, investment is so competitive, right? Because now when we talk about investment and we talk about retaining value, it's so competitive that it's not just between state competing with state, country competing with country. There is also intrastate competition, right? Sabah, Perak competing with Kedah, Kedah competing with Penang, and Johor competing with Selangor, right? And then Sabah, of course, now Sarawak is in the equation, and then the intrastate competition. So this competition actually, it can be healthy, but at the same time also there's big bets directed to it as well, because at federal level they will say that after all it's all in Malaysia. Why you want to compete? So they will decide for you. So I think those are the things that we have to be very careful. All right. You were really right on the value, retaining the value. I think it's not just retaining the value, retaining our money as well is important too.
Lastly, before we end, the AIM Summit, you've attended as well, Doc. I was there for 2 days as well. And it was quite a salubrious environment where we saw policymakers, practitioners, people that were on the ground, that's always doing the good fight on the ground itself. We saw Dr. Roger was there, Dr. Jaffrey, Dr. Masidi, even Dr. Atta Kurup came down as well. These are decision makers, policy leaders, right? But obviously, we cannot have every policy maker and decision maker in the summit. You have been in the academic, the theoretical world, and the corporate world, the empirical world. What can you say to probably the decision makers and policy makers out there? It's probably going to watch this episode, hopefully, based on the lessons of that summit, because we saw delegation from the Securities Commission, HSBC, from Chinese development companies, Taiwanese development companies, even the Bhutanese came down to Kota Kinabalu for this, right? But of course, we wish that we can have more policymakers in the room to, like you said, infusion of these ideas. What would you say to them in the context of the upcoming Sovereign Wealth Fund? Like, what lessons from this summit do you think you want to inculcate to the decision makers?
Well, from the previous summit, I think it was amazing. It really set a tone how we look at climate and how we look at our abundance of forests, environment, which is amazing. I mean, especially for Sabah. Everyone was so impressed. Like I said, if you ask Sabahan, they all know, right? But other people look at us like a diamond, right? Look at us like there's so many things we can do. it's not just carbon trading. There's so many things that with the environment that we can do that monetize it, while at the same time preserving it, and then generate income from that. So a lot of people see that opportunity. And I think it's also, we change the perspective that looking at our environment like an ATM machine. I think I would like to reiterate what Tan Sri Andrew Sheng said. We look at environment like ATM machine, cut the tree, get the money, that's it, replant it, right? We no longer think like that, right? Sabahan don't think like that anymore, right? Because we know the value of our environment, right? And based on that conferences, there's so much funding, right? So much funding looking at to help in terms of green finances, green project, and so many, you name it, label types of funding. They offer to Sabahan to help us, all right? So that's amazing. That's actually set the tone that when we look at our environment, how we want to monetize it without harming the environment. Right, so again, this environment, right? Like I said, this is where we want to convert our environment resources as financial asset. Now, the existing resources that we have from carbon trading that we have, right? All the environmental business associated to sustainability. All this, number one, you can use Sovereign Wealth Fund as part of the vehicle. Say, for instance, if you want to invest in carbon trading, right? Carbon trading is very sensitive, all right? It's not sensitive because we have to be very careful with carbon trading, right? So, but we do have Kwamut, right? It's listed in Bursa, all right? 50 ringgit per credit, okay, which is good, all right? We have 180,000 now, right? So, so Sovereign Wealth Fund is part of the instrument, all right, that we can use to help finance our environment. So it's no longer the traditional way. That conference actually set also a new tone for us, that looking at environment from beyond conventional way, right? How we can monetize it without harming our environment, how we can utilize our resources that provide inclusivity for the people, and more importantly, building sustainable resilience. I think that's very important. All the climate change discussion, the discourse is always about sustainable resilience. The fact that we have climate change and carbon governance, right, and enactment, that actually set the foundation for us to move forward from this conference, right? And of course, like I said, the idea is the same with the Sovereign Wealth Fund too. With the environment, we want to convert this environment as a financial asset and also asset for us to grow, right? Sovereign Wealth Fund is the same as well, where we set our trajectory with the resource wealth that we have, convert into financial asset for us to grow. We have the ingredient to grow. Sabah is just like diamond in the rough. We have to polish it to grow, to dazzle.
Well, hopefully it doesn't take long for us to shine in the region. That was Dr. Firdausi Sufian, political economist of UiTM. And thank you so much, Doctor, for taking your time to speak to us today. Definitely, Sabah is not lacking for financial sophistication and expertise, right? That if we want to grow, we need to push it a bit more. We have to put pedal on the metal just a bit more and see what we can experiment when it comes to financing, when it comes to investment and sustainability. So that's another reason why Sabah truly matters. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Sabah Matters Podcast. Catch us on the next episode where we will try and secure more experts, thinkers and policy makers on why Sabah truly matters. Thank you so much, Doctor, for coming in today.
Thank you so much, Adi.